The Secret of Mana Remake for the PS4, Steam, and the Vita is a game that raises a serious question for all of us who played and loved the original SNES classic. That being, can a remake be too faithful to its source material? And to the absolute shock and horror of its creators, trying to please their fans, I think the answer might actually be yes. A common phrase we often hear a lot today is that Hollywood has run out of ideas, constantly remaking and rebooting franchises for better or worse. And while there are direct parallels to this in the gaming industry, you don't hear that complaint quite as often. Our hate tends to be more geared towards the overabundance of sequels, the yearly same game syndrome, and of course, questionable marketing tactics. And realistically, it's probably because us, as gamers, are so used to seeing games ported, and being optimistic here, improved upon. But what's actually pretty rare to see is a straight up remake. So when we finally do get one, and especially when it comes from a big name company, I think we can all agree that our expectations tend to be a bit too high. But honestly, is that really unreasonable? After all, a remake means that you have the greatest advantage possible, the wisdom of hindsight. Basically, knowing what worked and what didn't, and then using that information to its fullest. And if you've read or heard anything about Secret of Mana's remake, then you undoubtedly already know that Square Enix didn't do that. Damn it. In fact, all I've heard is people trashing this game, and while I do tend to agree with a lot of the criticism being lobbied at the game, I don't think it's bad. So let's see what they actually did and didn't do right. And fortunately, I have my handy dandy checklist here that we made last time. Yeah, if you haven't checked out my review of the original Secret of Mana, I highly recommend pausing this video and watching that one first. Get yourself caught up, enjoy my childish glee and wonderment, and really see why this remake had a lot to live up to. And don't worry, I'll still be here when you get back.
One eternity later.
Well, you took your sweet time coming back. It's okay, I tend to get sidetracked on YouTube too. But now that you're all caught up, if you'll recall, last time I made a wish list of all the things I really wanted to see the remake do. And despite missing the mark in plenty of places, it surprisingly actually did hit some of them. Bravo game, bravo, with one of the best changes coming from the audio. Of course, that being said, the audio is definitely going to fall into two categories here, which actually will be the repeating trend with this game. There's the area that most of us will agree with, and then there's the one that's probably going to get its fair share of hate. Now, what we'll all probably agree with is that the music is still amazing, with Secret of Mana's iconic soundtrack essentially getting remixed for the remake. Now, whether or not you like these remixes is mostly personal preference. Regardless, the tracks still cover the gambit, ranging from lighthearted to fast and action-packed to deep and heavy. Oh, how I wish I had the soundtrack. You'd think with a limited physical release of the game that was store exclusive, it would have come with a soundtrack, like most collector's editions do. But then, I guess this really isn't a collector's edition, now is it? Only in Japan, only in Japan. Yeah, I'm not bitter about that at all. Moving on, all that aside, overall the tracks in this game are still amazing. But maybe not as amazing as the more timeless originals. But that being said, the game actually gives you the option to use the original soundtrack, which still sounds great. So for giving the option, no penalty. Now, if that's what we can all agree with, what is it about the audio that's going to suffer the most scrutiny? Well, I can just let you hear that for yourself.
Listen. I entrust the sword to you.
Huh? What do you mean? Ugh, what's up with this sword? sword!
Yeah. One of the few completely new additions to the game is the voice acting. A feature that was getting itself that delicious internet hate long before the game dropped. And for what it's worth, I can kind of understand why. But I don't fault the main character's performances. No, what I think is at fault here is the dialogue itself. Pretty much all of the dialogue remains identical to the SNES counterpart, and it just doesn't sound right spoken out loud, which is probably due to just how blunt and devoid of character it can be. Now this is doubly true for the NPCs, which, yes, every single NPC in the game is voiced, and some are clearly just randoms that were just pulled off the streets.
Did you know there's an enormous tree called a mana tree? That's what they tell me.
But I think when the main cast is just talking in some of the added scenes that didn't need to match the original mind you, they sound a lot better and are just much more enjoyable. Regardless though, you're in luck. If you really hate the voiceovers, or you just need to hold steadfast to the subs over dubs camp, the option to turn on Japanese voices is available to you. Or you could just straight up turn off the voice acting altogether and just read everything like you did on the SNES version. Oh, and extra note here, the music and sound effects actually start out pretty loud and tend to overshadow the voices. So I do recommend adjusting everything pretty early on. Still though, for including the different voice options or the flat out removal of the voices, once again, I got a call, no penalty. But what is going to receive a penalty and goes hand in hand with the dialogue is the story. Simply put, the story in the remake is pretty much word for word the same as it was on the SNES. And let me tell you, that is not a good thing. If you'll recall, I mentioned in my previous video that the original Secret of Mana was intended to be a launch title for the now defunct SNES CD add-on. The switch from the CD-based game to the cartridge-based game resulting in losing roughly 40% of the game's intended content. Content that I really was hoping would have been included in the remake, with a portion of it being in the story. But sadly, that's just not the case. It's pretty much just a carbon copy of the original, flaws and all. The story, while still a solid good versus evil tale with moments of fun banter and dark overtones, still feels rushed. Things just happen with little to no input from our characters, like towards the end of the game when our heroes are sent on multiple wild goose chases trying to find the Sage Jock, during which the fact that the Sage is hardly ever mentioned is a bit of a red flag. Or how about that underworld that apparently fuels our villains' powers? I mean, that just comes out of nowhere. Really, nothing in the story has been elaborated on or expanded upon. I wanted to know more about the lore, more about this world. And you know, that lack of detail was fine on the SNES, but gaming as a whole has evolved. There are entire games that are basically just interactive stories, so I think a little bit more here really would have helped out a lot. But that being said, credit where credit is due. I greatly appreciate the one story aspect that was added, which I can't help but wonder if that was part of the lost 40% or not. But who really knows? But I'll tell you that it's that addition that is easily my favorite change to the game, which is the added scenes that take place in the inns. Every time you stay at an inn, basically going to save and recover, a mini cutscene plays with our characters just talking about the events they've experienced in the game. Though they're completely out of sequence, I mean, how often do they really expect us to go to the inns? Personally, I ended up just going in and out over and over to watch them all right before the final battle. But still, I loved these scenes because aside from being new, they were character development, and not just for our heroes. And realistically, they were just entertaining, as they showed off just how much our characters slowly became friends. And by that, I mean almost every single cutscene ends with them mercilessly mocking each other. Ah, friendship.
Don't get mad, sis, but you toss and turn so much the room rattles. I can barely get any shut-eye.
What? I do not. Besides, you snore so loudly you wake up the innkeeper.
I object. I don't remember ever snoring.
Of course you don't remember. You were asleep.
Well, it's a wonder any of us can sleep with all this racket.
Also, I want to throw out there that these scenes have much better dialogue and are the reason I don't really blame the voice acting as far as quality goes. I really do just love seeing these characters interact, even if how I see them is a serious hot topic surrounding this game. The graphics are absolutely the biggest change this game made from its jump from the SNES, and unless you're blind, it's pretty easy to see why. Full 3D! Or really 2.5D, but whatever, it's 3D graphics. And man, have I seen a lot of hate over this. And for what it's worth, I do tend to agree that the graphics are flawed, but not for the same reasons I've been hearing about. The number one complaint I've been hearing about Secret of Mana's new graphics are that they're bad. That's it, they're just bad. And my response is, by what standards? Because from what I can tell, at worst, the graphics are just, average. But I do understand that this is a tricky topic. First impressions would show you that this game feels like it's from the past, featuring a pretty low poly count, more akin to the PS2 or handhelds, which realistically is what this remake was probably intended to be. Remember that this game wasn't only released on the PS4 and Steam, but the Vita as well. And really, I wouldn't be surprised if this game was originally planned to be built exclusively for the Vita. That's all speculation, of course, but I'm sure the fact that sales being better in the West for a console that's actually still being sold probably didn't have any factors in deciding what platforms the remake would ultimately be released on. But I bring this up because it truly does matter. It sets an expectation. Games on the PS4 are expected to look like games on the PS4. And that's not even counting the expectations people have for Square Enix titles. And let's be real here, we all know what remake their A-team is really working on. Please be good, please be good. Plus, it makes me wonder, how would people have looked at these graphics if, for example, a small indie team had made a game that looked just like this? I bet it would have gotten a lot of praise. But again, expectations. But with that being said, I don't think the graphics are all that bad. And that's because the graphics in Secret of Mana are bright and colorful, with a world that is still fun to see. Plus, it's probably the most faithful I've ever seen in the jump from 2D to 3D. For better or worse, it really does look like the sprites have almost popped straight into the third dimension, with every enemy, weapon, and iconic scene being almost point for point with that of the original. In fact, it's too much like the original, and nowhere is that more evident than in the animations. Yes, that is where my distaste in the graphics lie. The animations in Secret of Mana just feel completely half-assed, with the worst offender being the cutscenes, or one type specifically. In the remake, you have three primary sections of dialogue. The standard in-game scenes where the characters pop off the screen and chat through emotes, both of which are fine by the way. We see this all the time in anime games and in RPGs, so no problems there. But it's these main cutscenes, scenes that make up important parts of the story and are one of the bigger changes made from the 2D to 3D that completely botches it up by not having lip syncing. They spent all this money on voice actors, but at the most important parts, it becomes distracting when the characters talk and their mouths are just hanging open. And it makes no sense either, since the mouths are clearly modeled and moved to show off the emotions. Why didn't they animate them? And the first cutscene of the game is clearly the worst of the bunch because it has this idiot talking.
Guys! Wait! Up! Whoa!
Shh! Be quiet, stupid. If the Elder finds us here, we're done for.
Yeah, the 3D sprite comparison is amazing, but jeez, is that awkward. But what really makes this all weird is that they left out the important things like lip movement, but they left in the awkward animations that were clearly limitations of the time. Like when characters just pop up out of nowhere to enter a scene, or every time you talk to someone important, the trio comes together into each other's character only to back up and line up. I mean, attention to detail, but that's not where it should have been. These are things that could have been, and realistically should have been, cleaned up and made to look a lot better. But hey, at least the shopkeepers are still dancing. The last points of note about the graphics are how well they work into the gameplay. Secret of Mana is an action RPG where the players actively move around the map and face off against enemies using timed strikes and a variety of weapons and magic. And it's translated very well into the realm of 3D. So much so that it practically feels like they just reskinned the original. If you like the combat system on the SNES, then you shouldn't have any qualms here. And despite the changes that were made, I quickly found myself falling into the same rhythm as I did with the classic version, and still having lots of fun with it. But changes have been made, some more subtle than others, with there being a few too many nitpicky changes to mention here. Still though, let's break out that list again, shall we? As far as the graphics go, gameplay wise, the only real problem is the bosses. Primarily that they have the same problem as the classic, and that's that they're all just recolors. Once again, way too many of the bosses are all just the same. I was really hoping that without the same limitations as the SNES, the bosses might have gotten changed around a bit, or at least gotten a few new moves, something. But no. Well, at least they don't spam undodgeable magic as much. And yeah, nothing has been changed with the magic system. But one change that I need to point out is also a mistake that I made during my last video, that a commenter so graciously enlightened me to: the hitboxes. In the classic game, during boss fights, unlike smaller monsters, the bosses don't dodge. You just miss, with no indication as to why. Now, I always thought that was due to crappy hit detection, but apparently, it was just a roll of the dice with the accuracy. The new game fixes that by showing you the miss, as well as just being a lot easier to hit foes now that you can attack in 8 directions instead of just 4. Plus, there are fewer cheap deaths and a lot less slowdown. Another nice little change they made is the update to the world map. Now, as much as I love me some Mode 7, this is just so much easier to navigate and really helps the world pop. Sadly though, that's really where the improvements stop, which of course is arguably the remake's biggest and undeniable flaw. Simply, why stop there? This is a remake, and even if it is just for the Vita, there is so much more power here to do more. Like maybe speed up the combat a bit, give enemies more variety, increase enemy count, something to make it feel like it's more than just a glorified port. But I get the feeling that they were tying their own hands by trying to keep it as faithful to the original as possible, and it has come back to bite them, especially with this last failure to evolve. And that would be around Secret of Mana's true claim to fame. You see, the Super Nintendo has one of the best lineups of RPGs ever, from titles like Final Fantasy IV and VI, Earthbound, and Chrono Trigger. Clearly steep competition. But what makes Secret of Mana truly stand out from the pack is the multiplayer co-op. And not just 2 players, but 3. And I'd ask again, how often do you see co-op RPGs? So yeah, this is a big deal, but the remake fails to deliver on the potential this had to grow. Simply put, the remake is couch co-op only. Now don't get me wrong, I love me some couch co-op. In fact, I think it's the best way to play co-op. But that being said, it's 2018. There is no excuse not to have online co-op in this day and age. After all, not everyone, let's just say those of us old enough to have played the original back when it came out, has the time to get together to regularly play a 10+ hour game. In my case, my buddy who played this game with me so long ago, you'll recall him from the last video as the hero who founded Fish Kickin', yes, I do intend to make that a thing, lives 6 hours away now, and with my busy schedule, I simply don't have the time to make that kind of drive. I'm all booked up. Yeah, and online co-op would have really been this game's major trump card over its predecessor, since Secret of Mana is best when playing with friends. And the fact that they didn't bother to improve the AI allies really helps to enforce that fact. Honestly, I kind of feel like the AI might have actually gotten dumber. Plus, it's weird that now allies can be left behind off screen, implying that online co-op might have been in the works at some point. Though that's just speculation on my part. Who really knows? Maybe they'll add it in at some point in a patch, or if you got the Steam version, a mod. Oh, and modders, while you're at it, can you fix another problem with the co-op that Square completely failed to fix? That whole pausing when players use their menu thing? Seriously, they could have at least made the using of items and casting of magic real time for the co-op, so the game doesn't feel like it's constantly being paused again and again during battle. Easy changes that could have gone a long way, completely missed. But even with all that complaining, the co-op is still fun, especially when playing with the right friends. Just like the original was. And honestly, that's probably the best way to look at this game as a whole. The Secret of Mana Remake is still a pretty solid game, if not one that feels a bit dated by today's standards, with it having nearly all the same flaws as its 25-year-old counterpart. Plus, adding in a few of its own unique flaws to the mix, with one major one that I can't let slide, which as of right now is, the game will randomly crash on you. A lot. Though they have promised to patch that out in the future, so here's hoping. But even with the promise of patches, that still leaves the real question. Is the Secret of Mana Remake worth your time? And unfortunately, I have to side towards no. The simple fact is, that if this game was to be released in a vacuum, that is to say it had no ties to the original, it would probably just be seen as an average but fun little co-op RPG that RPG fans might enjoy for its fun action and amazing music. But the truth is that a game like this simply can't escape being compared to the original, and that's what truly holds it back. The remake simply does far too little to elevate it above what came before, and depending on your tastes and expectations, for many, it's actually worse than the original, and I can understand why people would see it that way. Personally, as a fan of the franchise, I still enjoyed the game, but without any major improvements or innovations, aside from the fun character bits at the ends, it's hard to recommend it over the original, especially at $40, since you can just get an SNES Classic for twice that much with the original game on it. And over 20 other amazing games too. The simple truth is that any remake should strive to go beyond the original and carve out a name for itself on its own laurels. It should emphasize everything that made the original great, while fixing everything that didn't work. And this was Secret of Mana's big chance to do that, to finally surpass its SNES rivals. But it didn't, and it probably won't get another chance, which really sucks. But no matter what you think of the remake, love it or hate it, the fact remains that the original is still a classic, and nothing will ever change that. Hey everyone, Spammer D here. Gotta say, I'm a little bummed that the Mana remake didn't live up to expectations. But I hope that this review lived up to yours, and I want to know, if you played it, what did you think? Is there anything that I missed? Also, reviewing RPGs takes a little bit longer, so tell me if you want to see me look at more RPGs in the future. But until then, remember to subscribe, watch some more videos, preferably mine, and until next time, later.